Welcome to the first M&M episode on Outframed podcasts. Real conversations, real stories with my wife and best friend, Michelle. Today we're talking about the inner critic, that voice that we've been listening to since the very beginning, the one that we've blindly followed orders to, the one that's gotten us into trouble, and the same one that's kept us from being who we are meant to be. So, as we dive into this week's episode, we're doing things a little different. This is an in-person episode, using things that we have available to us, and we're excited to share with you our perspective on the critic. So, today, we're not going to just listen to the critic, we're going to talk back to it. Unfiltered, real stories, and intimate. Thank you for joining us on episode 3 of Outframed Podcast. Your beard is not made of 3 colors.
I don't have a beard.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's a lot of work. Anyways, welcome to Outframed Podcast. Today, we're doing our first M&M episode. M&M. That's always very tricky to say.
Want to start over?
No, I think we're good. Let's go. As I mentioned to a lot of the audience here, we're not perfect, and we're not going to allow perfection to get in the way of things. So on today's episode, we are going to do a roundtable with my wife and my best friend here, Michelle. Michelle, would you like to say hi?
How you doing?
So just so everyone knows, the Rat Pack is enjoying their Memorial Day, and I hope everyone out there is doing the same. But we wanted to tackle this week's inner critic and kind of bust them open and figure out, when did it start? Whose voice are we hearing? Is it our own? Is it someone that influenced us at an early age? What steps have we taken to, for lack of a better word, not let us control us, try to reel it back, maybe not obeying it all the time. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this week, as you know, Michelle, we were, talking about the different kind of critics that we have in our lives. The ones that are based on fear, or the ones that are telling us that we're not good enough to start. Why don't you kind of walk us through the inner critic for you? Like, when did your inner critic start in your life, and what was the voice that you heard?
I'm a firm believer that any of these sort of psychological things are absolutely ingrained in your childhood. Whoever was around you when you were a kid is influencing you and how you talk to yourself. And so it's not lost on me that my inner critic absolutely comes from my own parents. Specifically, I would say my dad, who is a pretty critical human being. I mean, just that was part of his nature, culturally, and just who he was. It was part of his nature to be pretty critical and tough on me. And I don't think that's the word, really. Tough on me. It is yes, tough on me, but I want to say expecting a lot of me. There was a really high threshold, and that will create a bit of that inner voice of, okay, maybe I'm not doing this good enough. I don't think he's going to approve of this, or maybe I shouldn't try this because I don't think that it's going to go the way you think it is, and he's not going to like it.
Yeah.
And in order to save myself from getting chewed out or whatever, you let the fear dictate and you don't do it.
I think that's a big struggle for us as kids, and in particular, we're trying to impress our parents. We start thinking that every avenue to making them proud of us or getting their approval is contingent on the fact that we're doing what they told. We're doing everything that they want us to do, anything from chores to good grades. We're appeasing them, but in some ways, we're starting to build that critic in ourselves at an early age that starts to control and dictate every little decision we make. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think, I know you and I were having some conversations earlier, and we were talking about this, that all of that grows and develops as you get older, depending on the experiences that you have. But it all begins in childhood, and whoever's around you and whoever's, the people that you're looking up to and attempting to impress.
Yeah, for me, it does stem from a lack of belonging, or I mean, I'm sorry, not a lack of belonging, but wanting to belong. When I go into a room, I think to myself, man, I really want everyone to see the best version of me. And I think growing up, part of that acceptance or maybe that behavioral was I would mimic characters that I saw on TV. I look at Jim Carrey, for example, and go, I could walk like him and try to mimic what he acted like. Most of it was, clips from In Living Color or Ace Ventura, like those were as a child thinking, hey, if I'm so capable of acting like this, mom and dad are really gonna think like, wow, he's such a great kid, and that kind of, at least for me, festered into wanting to be accepted in every room I would find myself in, beyond childhood, wanting to get liked and accepted for who I am, wasn't really the concern. It was more about what I could provide. In this case, entertainment, or some other quality that, as long as they liked it enough, then I would find my place. But it's kind of interesting to me when you say that when growing up in your house, you felt like your father, right, who's a very smart person, he kind of had a bar, and that bar was, seemingly very high. I could be off base, but I mean, you share with us, like, was it his expectations that at a certain age you had to be his level of intelligence, or did you get to like live a real childhood, or was it like, hey, I need you to grow up fast because the world is this way?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. No real childhood whatsoever. And no disrespect to my parents. My dad did it the way that his parents did it, and I think all of our parents do it the way that they think that they're doing it best. Um, no, no childhood whatsoever. All of my childhood was work and how do other people see you, and a lot of that has been imprinted on me and my inner critic as to whether or not I'm willing to spend the time to have people approve of me. I mean, what you were saying, I understand, because that is exactly who you are. It's always been who you are. And again, like I have said this before, maybe why the dynamic of you and I works is you are that person that wants that center of attention, and I am not. I don't want that center of attention. I very much want to throw in wherever it's important, wherever, like, I'll sit back and observe, and I'll throw in when I think that whatever I have to say is useful. Otherwise, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to continue observing. But whereas you, I mean, I'll harken back to that party that my sister had more than 20 years ago when just a room full of people that had no idea who you were. We were the oldest people at that party. And she's running around the party going, have you met Mark? Like you're some sort of celebrity. Yeah, and you're sitting in the middle of the room haphazardly playing a 6-string guitar that you had just picked up.
It was a 12-string, I believe.
That you're right. I stand corrected. It was a 12-string, but just sitting in the middle of the room drunk and playing a guitar for attention. Like, you have always been that person that your validation in yourself is obtained through others' acceptance of you. And in my opinion, and we've had this conversation before, sometimes maybe to a fault, to where you're bending over a little too far backwards to fit in,
Yeah, I've seen that in myself, especially when I was younger. I was always trying to feel like, hey, I'm worthy of this group. I can be part of you guys. I know your rituals. I know the things you like to do. And at that party, I wasn't accustomed to being in parties like that. Like, a party for me was a group of friends. This was like a house party you see in a movie. It was like a huge group of everyone getting together. Your sister was able to reel in and just the sheer numbers, and I felt like, man, you know, I'm with you. This is your sister. Eventually, this is my family, in addition to my own. I want to have some value here. I want her to be proud of me. And just incidentally, like that night, she was very proud of me. And I was, yes, self-admitted, drinking and trying to play a 12-string guitar very poorly, I might add, to impress everyone. But I think that's, again, that was something I was growing through. Going to high school, being told by teachers, I wasn't good enough for one thing or another, and always having that critic in my mind as a doubter. Like, oh, you're not good enough. People don't see you this way, and I would say that, and I'd love to get your take on it. It does feel like a form of trauma. It does feel like, for me, I never thought of it in those terms until I started, really taking a look at myself in these last couple of years and say, I kind of just adopted these ways of acting and being, and I never really thought about, well, is that serving me, or is that just something I do because it's worked in the past? You know what I'm saying?
I do, but okay, you touched on something that I actually want you to expound on. Um, the thing about the what your teacher said to you, because I think this is going to play into the rest of this conversation. She said something to you that made your inner critic go, "Hey, well, if she thinks this about me, I'm not getting any validation from this person. I'm not going to keep trying to impress her. So I'm just going to have to impress myself and show her someday."
Yeah.
So maybe touch on that.
Well, okay, so this was a different time. Like, when I was going to school, there were two camps. There was the camp of the jocks. You play football, wrestling, you go out and do sports. That's what you do. And then the other group was just the academics. The ones who, you find them in the library or you find them in the computer lab, right? Well, I enjoyed both. I enjoyed playing sports and I enjoyed computers, and so I found myself in kind of the in between of both areas. If I was on the football field, or I was out training, they were like, oh, here's the guy who likes to play on his computer. Like, you like to play on your computer, and at a time it wasn't like it was a negative thing, but it was kind of a thing that was seen as what geeks do. It wasn't seen as, oh, you're a gamer, you're a content person. None of this existed then. This was, oh, you're a nerd, you're a geek, and those terms really didn't like were a problem for me, but people really seemed to typecast me. And then if I was in the computer lab trying to learn how to do computer programming, right, which I had, yeah, I struggled in my first couple years with it. I think when I got to college, I had some great teachers who just saw me as someone who was just trying to learn it. If I had to dress up for a game, and I had to wear these purple shirts back in the day, that was what seniors wore for their varsity games. Um, I would get the other side of it, like, oh, he's just probably doing this for fun, or he's just doing it for whatever reasons. He's just trying to get an easy A. And it was a struggle. Like, I felt myself, if I was in the classroom, my inner critic was like, you need to, like, really pay attention and make sure she sees you paying attention, and she validates that you're paying attention. But no matter what I did, it was just like, oh, you're not getting it. You're not getting it. And that would feed that critic a lot, at least for me. It fed that insecurity, like, oh man, I'm just not built for this, like. And then probably what came is the worst of that event is your teacher telling you, you're probably cut out for customer service, you're probably cut out for, like, this kind of work. And I just felt like, wow, I know I'm from a different side of the neighborhood. I'm not from the greatest neighborhood. I know that, that's a very deep and personal wound to me that we could talk about on another day. But for what I had, I was rich in it. I had family, and I had a mother and a father who supported me. So I didn't think I had as bad as people made it out to be. Maybe I didn't have a big house, okay, but I was in a safe place, and I could go to school, and I could learn to be a programmer, and I could learn how to play football and do wrestling and do all these other things that I enjoyed. And I didn't have to be the best. That was the thing that I had to probably let go of later in life is I felt like I always had to be number one in order to be in it, or I was a fraud or a fake. So yeah, the inner critic at least at that stage was acceptance. And as it evolved, it was inclusion, right? So acceptance was like, everyone accept me to be part of you. And then inclusion was, even though you guys don't accept me, please include me in things because I just want to be there. And then I mutated out of all of that into, I just had to tell myself it was okay. Not everyone's going to like me no matter what I do. And I have to accept, at least to myself now, not to the version I was projecting, that is not my responsibility. And this was a huge breakthrough for me. It's not my responsibility for you to like me. If you don't like me, you don't like me. And if I remind you of something or someone in a negative way, right, then truly I always felt that was unfair, but I can't change that either. If I look like someone you know, fantastic, you know. If I act like someone you know, again, fantastic. What can I do, right? But that was my struggle, and I felt like for me, um, it didn't. This inner critic didn't remind me of anyone. It was just like It was like society had given me so many things to latch onto to say, I guess this is the way I have to be to survive now.
So I feel like you left out some important details in that story, and that was what I was, I guess, trying to prompt you to tell. Is that she made a very important comment to you that you would never have a career in coding, because the detail you left out was that this class was computer programming, and that she said you would never have a career doing that. And you and I, years later, ran into her at a grocery store, and she asked what you were doing with your life, and you told her that you had become a software engineer.
And her expression said it all, right? You were there.
Correct. She was incorrect about you because she had, you know, pigeonholed you into whatever typecast she thought that you were, you know. But I do also want to touch on what you just said right now, about when people say that you look like somebody they know or whatnot. I know we talked about this before, but I feel like it's important to say. You tend to look at that as a negative, and I just don't think it's always a negative. When somebody says that you look like someone that they knew, it doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad thing. Like, oh, you look like my asshole ex, or you look like my dad who never loved me or left me, or no, it could have been you look like my dad who I always admired, or you behave in a manner that reminds me of my mom who passed away, or something like that. It could be a positive thing. It doesn't always necessarily have to be negative. So your inner critic needs to stop assuming that that's a negative connotation.
Yeah, and here's the thing about that. I feel everything you said is very true. That I see it as a half empty kind of glass. You know, and maybe I don't know, maybe I'm just drawn more to that because I guess because of the things I've had that have gone wrong in my life.
Mm-hmm.
If I set my expectations to zero, then it can't hurt me. You know, I'm set where I am. But part of the reason that inner critic is so strong on me in those areas of acceptance and inclusion is I don't want to be seen as your
Mm-hmm.
brother or your father or someone that reminds you of whether it's good or bad. I just want to be seen as myself. I don't want to be seen as anything else. And I think that's my identity crisis right there is um, part of what I feel makes me me is there should be no one out there that is like me. I mean, it's maybe elevating myself to the, level of special, um, and I take full responsibility in that. But I do think we're all individuals at the end of the day, and I want to be measured by who I am and not by any other precursed notion of someone else, if that makes
No,
sense.
it completely makes sense. And I agree with you that you have always operated under the assumption that there's nobody out there like you. Um, and that's why you take offense to that comment of you remind me of so and so. You know, I had a friend one time that if I said, "Oh, I saw this guy and he looks like you," he would say, "Kill him." He would always say that. He would say, "Kill him. There cannot be another." And it's exactly like that. And if I say, you know, Okay, well, say what you want to say. It doesn't matter that somebody looks like you or somebody reminded me of you. That I'm not going to feel bad about that just because you think that you're super special. Everybody's special and individual.
That's
That
the
doesn't
problem.
mean that that person isn't just as special as you in a different way, you know?
Yeah. So let me ask you this. My critic started at childhood. Yours sounded like it started at childhood. Um, what was, if you go back to that moment and when you first became aware of it, I think that's the thing. It's like consciousness. At some point you wake up and you realize, hey, I'm alive. I'm a me. I'm an I. And you're all of a sudden you're living this reality. And before that, you're not really sure how it came to be. And that's the great question for all of us, is like, what is my first memory? And I always equate that as, well, it's not your first memory. It's about your ability to identify consciousness. You're able to say, I am me, I am I. And when I think about the critic, okay, I'm wondering how soon after, right, did I recognize the critic? For me, I recognized it as a young boy growing up, trying to fit into everyone's box. But for you, right, you grew up a little bit different. I know a lot about your father. He came to America at a young age from Tehran, and he built himself up from nothing, right, which is a story for another day. But part of that upbringing, you learn how to be Iranian. You learn Middle Eastern culture. You're on the outside, you look like an American family, but on the inside, you were learning all the traditions and all of the cultural, nuances of your people. But at what point did you say, "Hey, I'm trying to appease my father. I'm trying to make him happy"? Was it something that you became aware of by self-reflection, or did you just like stumble into it and go, oh my gosh, I'm just doing this habit? At what point did you see that you had an inner critic?
Pretty much immediately, and without getting into too much detail that isn't necessary here for the internet, um, I feel like my role in my family largely was a protective role. And I had to be strong for my sisters, for my mom, for everyone. Um, I had to have this role, and I wasn't allowed really the time to to say, oh well, you can't really do this right now because it might fail. I had that inner critic, and I was noticing it at a very young age, but I had to become friends with it pretty soon. You know, because when you're in an environment where you're kind of, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, for whatever their situation is, definitely maybe not the same as mine. That you have to grow up pretty quick, that you have to get to be friends with your inner critic pretty quick. Like, okay, well, he's saying I should do this, but I know that I need to do this, because it's better for everyone else if I don't listen, or if I, you know, or if I do. I don't know. It's knowing when to discern.
Do you think your critic, or the critic that you became aware, was it modeled? I mean, you said that your father was a huge impact, on your upbringing. Do you feel like you modeled some of your inner critic based on his inner critic?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, because I think based on environment, that's how everybody's inner critic is developed. Is from whoever's around you when you're a kid. Your mom, your dad, your siblings, your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents. It's all going to shape you. And then as you grow older and develop more, experience more of life, it changes. It changes slightly, but I think it remains a little of the same as when you were a kid, because that's where it started.
Yeah, and what's interesting is we learn our habits from our parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're the first influence in our life. I wonder how much, I don't know if there's been analysis done on it, but at least I think it's relevant for this week's theme, is how much of the critic have we inherited from our parents? Like, they always talk about inheriting good and bad, but how much of those critics or ego or voice that was our mother and father shortcomings, they it kind of bled into us, and it became our own voice. I mean, it sounds like us, but some of its personality was inherited from those early fences, if you want to call them that.
I feel like we don't even notice that in ourselves until our partner or someone says, hey, calls us out on it. Like, hey, you realize you sound like your mom right now.
That's
You
right.
realize
That's very
you
true.
realize what you just did right now to your daughter is exactly what your dad would have said or whatever. I feel like that's when we notice that, oh, okay, maybe I am similar, and you can't help it.
No, I don't think you can. I think it's because it's so part of you. You just think like, this is how I am. It's how I've been. And the POV of it is, well, I'm doing exactly what I was taught. I'm doing exactly what was learned from, my upbringing. So why is it wrong? And that's a thing. Like when we talk about families, every family does things a little differently. Everyone has, a different way of they approach a Sunday or a Saturday or a Monday, whatever the case is. Um, I see that the shock comes when you go to another family and you realize, hey, whoa, you guys get together for every holiday, for every little get together.
Mm-hmm.
We only get together for like the big
Right.
ones. Why do you think um why do you think, maybe in this regard, why do you think some of the critic that is healthy for us um is absorbed from bad families? And I'm throwing it out this way, okay? The critic that protects us, right? That inner voice that says, "Hey, Michelle, Mark, don't touch the stove. It's hot." And you're like, "Oh, that's fear. I should touch the stove." No, that's lessons learned. The critic in that voice is telling you, in this case, I'm looking out for you. So, at what point is a bad situation, right, or a bad environment, whatever you want to call it, can be multifaceted. How does that lend itself to a positive critic that's just protecting you from yesterday's mistake?
That's an interesting question. I think a lot of what you touched on right now, because I feel like the last thing that I said, I probably should have extended a little bit. That it lends into where you start breaking generational habits. You know what I mean? Because just saying, "Oh, well, this is the way my parents were, and so I'm like that too," that's lazy. That's not growth. You know, everybody to a certain extent, yeah, is going to be a little bit like their parents, but they're going to grow and they're going to heal from those traumas a little bit and become who they are. It's not always going to be exactly the same. You're going to parent differently than your parents parented. You're gonna take the good things that you think they did right and carry that on and say, okay, I think this tradition that they held on to would be good for me to keep with my own kids, or I think that this set of qualities that they instilled in me is something I want to instill in my kids. But then you also want to look at it and say all this other stuff they did that I think didn't benefit me at all and maybe hurt my psyche a little bit. It's not for me. I'm not going to do that to my kids. You just kind of take the good, leave the bad, and create your own capstone for that, if you will. But
Yeah, there's a lot of
harkening
truth in
back
what you
to
say
what
there.
your question was, I don't know. I think because your experiences when you're younger, let's say that whether they're good or bad experiences, they all shape the way that you think when you're older. Like if you have a lot of negative experiences, that's just going to give you a lot of life experiences to know what not to do when you're older. Or you see someone else going down that path and making a wrong mistake and say, I already been here. Don't do that. You know.
100%. You talked about generational habits or, inheritance, if you will. And I think that's part of that critic. If the critic that was loud in your mother or father's head, was one of, like for your father, he wanted to be the smartest guy in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone needed to validate his intelligence in that regard, and he sought it out too. He made sure that he was talking about topics and things that everyone should be aware of. And if they weren't aware of, then he would educate them, hand in the pocket, based on some of those pictures that I saw. But I think something that you said is really profound is, we inherit a lot of our parents, good or bad, habits, and it's not their fault. I honestly think it's just some cyclical thing that's happened to everyone's parents and their parents' parents and so on and so forth, right? That you actually have to be the one that says, hey, I've seen the madness from my parents, from their perspective as children to their parents. And if we were lucky enough to see even your great great grandparents, right, you saw it still as this looks like it's been handed down this entire time. This doesn't look like something that was their idea. It just looks like something that was taught for them to be a certain way. So it was included in, like you called it, the capstone, the pass along. And I think it takes a really strong parent, and I know there's a lot of them out there, that says, hey, you know what? Not everything I was taught and not everything that was given to me is a 10 out of 10, you know? And it's hard because, if especially if you do have a relationship with your mother or your father, right? Well, you don't want to ever want to see them other than that they're heroes and they did great things, right? But the reality is their parents are not heroes and their parents are not heroes and no one's perfect. And they were just operating on what they were taught, you know? So when you said, hey, as an individual, I don't agree with the things that my mom and dad did 100% of the time. I will take these certain items and I said, these are great. I like what mom did here. I'm going to include that. Didn't care for what dad there. All right, I'm gonna exclude that. And I think that's why it's important that, especially when you're having kids, right? You got to know, well, if you don't have an example of the thing you remove, hopefully your partner does. Because if they don't, then I think you have to come up with your own strategy. You have to say, you're like, all right, we both have the similar experience. We don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we going to do? I think naturally we'll say we'll do the opposite. But then here he is again, or in your case, there she is again. The inner critic goes, well, that's not how your parents did it. That's not how you're supposed to do it. Why are you doing this differently? You know this isn't going to work. You're changing the game. But I think that's the strength, right? You're going against the grain for a better future for those for your kids. You're saying, I'm going to end the generational gap here.
And I think that's the point. I mean, I think when we're young parents, we do have our inner critic telling us, if I raise my kids this way, what will my parents think? Or if I raise my kids this way and it's not how they raise, like, okay, the age old trope of like, when I was a kid, if I jumped on the couch, my dad would get mad at me, yell at me, beat my butt, right? But when my kids were little and they went to his house, if they jumped on his couch, it was like, oh, they're fine. They can jump on the couch. It's okay. But I'm the parent
That
now.
whole standard is real with grandkids, just so you know. I
Correct.
mean, we've seen it, right?
Correct. But I'm the parent now. And I'm like, it's not okay. It wasn't okay when I was a kid and I was doing it. And it's not okay now that they're kids. I'm teaching them manners the same way you were teaching us manners, whether I'm doing it a different way than you did it. And that doesn't matter. Not it or it shouldn't to you anyway, but we're gonna achieve the same end goal.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? I just want to touch on that. We as kids were told, man, if you do that, you can get your butt whooped. That's just the generation we grew up in. That's where we came from. But these kids, the grandkids, oh, it's so cute. Oh, look at them go. Look, oh, bah bah bah, as they say in the Middle Eastern household. That's what I learned as a Westerner. I learned a little word here and there. Let me ask you this. Okay, so we modeled things after our parents. We understand the generational hand-me-downs. We identified the critic came shortly after consciousness, and then it was nurtured through, our fences, whether they were parents, teachers, society, roles, whatever they are. But let's talk about what it cost us. Like in order to, like day to day, year after year, what did it cost us to listen to the critic? Like I'm gonna ask you first, and then I'll try to answer this back. When you think about the critic and the voice you've listened to for all these years, how, how do you quantify the cost of listening to the critic versus your true self?
Mine is largely based on fear. I mean, I think a lot of people can relate to that too. If you have that voice in your head saying you can't do this because if you don't have A, B, and C in place, you're going to fail and you're going to look foolish, and you better not do that. There have been several things in my life that I have failed to even initiate because of that. and those regrets, you know. Um, but I feel like everybody has maybe a few of those where they're like, "Oh, yeah, I wish I had taken that shot," rather than listening to my inner voice of, "Hey, maybe you shouldn't do this because there's a possibility that you might fail in it." You know, there's always a possibility that you're gonna fail in something.
So for you, the inner critic would leverage fear of failure as a way to keep you from breaking the mold, right? And in some one way, you're breaking the mold by eliminating the generational hand-me-downs, but in another, like it was very strong in this regard, where it kept you kind of under thumb and say, "Hey, Shell, you are not going to do this thing because if you fail, it's going to be the worst." So let me ask you this: how how was failure like growing up the way you did? Like, was failure seen as a as an opportunity to learn and grow, or was failure seen as you're dumb, you screwed up, like all the negative connotations that would come with it, and then the voice being amplified because now it has a latest example to feed off of.
Well, given what we've already said about my history, education was an absolute top priority. My dad came here from Iran on on an education visa, with little to no English at all, and just started, like, built the house from the ground up. And that bar was set this high for me, and I had to be able to not only jump over it, you know, but run further. And for me, my inner voice was always the one saying, you're never even gonna reach that bar, so why even try, you know. And no matter how hard I tried to impress my dad, it was never good enough. I would come home with a spelling test when I was a little kid that was like, "Oh, we got an A on it." Well, you missed one. I'm sure somebody else in the class didn't miss any. So what are you doing wrong? How could you study harder, you know?
You know, and I feel like because the fear of failure was so high, or at least as a repercussion in your mind, right? It was thought as, well, if you fell, right, it takes you back to that kind of that modeling childhood fences. But, if you think about today, or even in the last, 10 years, is that failure kept you from taking that chance, deciding, hey, this is something I really, really, really want. And can you share any examples of something that you wanted to try, but fear of failure ruled the day, at least at that time?
uh I don't know if I really want to get into that one.
Well, feel free to share what. It doesn't have to be the most intimate, but share an example where, and it doesn't matter the scale. I think what matters is um, that you have examples, right, where you wanted to turn left instead of going right, you know, and there was like maybe that fear of failure that was taught to you prevented you from doing something.
I don't know if I'm hearkening to something that has happened to me recently. It's that I had a friend that I was concerned about. I've been friends with her a very long time, and ending a friendship is always the hardest thing to do, and it's not something I ever wanted to do. I still love her. I still worry about her. Um, but my inner voice kept telling me that I needed to take space from her because she was her life choices were impacting me. I was spending entire days worried about her, and what might happen to her. Um, and it was just too much. And I had to take a step back. And I was concerned about it because my inner voice kept saying, if you do this, something may happen, something bad may happen to her, and that'll be on your conscience, And I don't want to live with that. I don't. But at the same time, I think because I've been allowing myself to be this involved in her drama for this long, I had to take that step back. And I feel like even though I was worried that would be a bad choice, it was a good choice for me in the long run because I feel more peace not waking up every day to that violence that was her life.
Yeah. And as someone on the outside watching you wrestle with that, she's been your friend for, I think just about as long as you've known me. So it's a quite a history there, you know. But I would see you sometimes where your life was, I mean, no life is perfect, right? But your life it was on the daily, it was steady, you know, it was stable. But when I would see her call you and she would unload about her life, I saw you carrying that weight. And I also saw you conflicted about that. You know, like I'm being the good friend by listening and being there. And you know that part of you is going, hey, you know, this is really hard because I'm not equipped. Like as a friend, I'm here to listen, I'm here to be supportive, but I don't know how to fix this for you. And it feels like all the weight was shifting towards you, like, come up with the answer. Fix me, fix me, fix me. You should fix me. And I would look at you and go, I don't think it's fair for you to be in that position. I have always said to myself, you know, especially in these last few years, the happiness of an individual. You know, like I really thought it was all on us to, you know, try to create an environment that allows us to be happy. But then I realized no environment will give you happiness. Happiness is within yourself. You have to decide if I want to be happy, I'm going to change my perspective. You know, if I want to see the world in a better light, I need to start looking at things with a different point of view. You know, and when I would see those phone calls come in, I would dread them. You know, my inner critic was like, "Yeah, you know what you should tell her. You should tell her it's no good." Blah blah blah. And I'm like, "Well, why don't I?" Because I know it's a complicated situation, and I know that there's a long time of friendship there, but I also realized that it took something very recently, you know, and we won't get into the details, but it took something very recently where you were able to have that conversation with her and you said, "Look, I love you. I worry about you, and I want you to get your life better, and I want you to be okay, but I can't fix this for you. I need you to try to fix it, and I'm going to be here when you're done fixing it, you know?" And that's something that I wish maybe us growing up as kids, right? Now full grown adults, we're getting into the next part there too. But boundaries are important for this very reason. You know, boundaries are important for growth as well as the critic. You know, I think one thing that we'll touch on in a bit here is the critic is someone who keeps us locked under from being our true self, but at the same time, it has helped us in the past. And maybe that's why we rely on it to this day. There has been moments where it has been a friend and an ally or a preventer of disaster or issue. But not every time is it acting in that capacity. So um, let me ask you this. Um, well, let me touch on the topic because I didn't drive into it any at all on my side. Um, for me, it's tough. For me, I would say that the critic cost me time. It cost me a lot of time. So many years of trying to appease everyone in the room, and then every time the new person I was going to appease switch characters. Like, oh, this is the new teacher, this is the new boss. You know, at some point, and I think it happened probably around the time I lost my mom, which is a couple years ago. Which you know that was a really hard time for me, as you know. And I started really reflecting on where am I supposed to go? Like, what am I supposed to do now? Okay, like the person that I needed to help with some of these voices was my mom. I'd go to her and I'd talk to her about, hey, you know, I'm thinking this way and I'm thinking that way. What do you think? And one thing that was great about my mom is I could give her both scenarios and she would tell me the pros and cons of them. She would listen and then she would offer some insight that I didn't think about. But after 2 years of not having her, and we're coming up on the second year in a few weeks, um, yeah, I started thinking about that critic, and I started thinking, well, why am I trying so hard to appease everyone in the room when they don't really care? Like it's not reciprocal for me, right? To be in the capacity of approving to them when at the end of the day they're wrestling with their own critic. They're trying to appease others. I'm not even on the spectrum. And so I had to start purposely trying to do things that was was against my nature, like things that I would normally not want to do. So one thing that I did as a way to not listen to my critic was, as you know, I started jujitsu. And I started doing something healthy as opposed to not so healthy. And I would throw myself on the mats day after day, week after week, go to competitions, at least the first 7 competitions I can get my hands on, and go. And I did that until I got my blue belt, right? And I still train to this day. But even now, the critic tells me, you're not going to be successful at what you want to go after. Your time is done. You're not perfect. You need to you spoil your chances. So I think for me, the critic has cost me time because I don't know how much time I have. We're not guaranteed 75 years. And to me, I felt, hey, I'm never going to be ready. Just like jujitsu, I'm never going to be ready for that next belt. I'm just going to keep going. And I think jujitsu kind of helped me break the critic's hold on me a little bit. I don't say fully because I think that, something that you had touched on before today is, it's not something we ever get fully, rid of. It's with us. It becomes just a companion, but it can be a companion in a good or bad way. It just depends on what our relationship is. And for me, jujitsu helped like the critic know, hey, if you think that you have it all figured out, go on the mats and you'll see. You're not going to have it figured out. You just got subbed a bunch of times. How do you feel? Do you feel defeated? Feel like you learned something? The critic was always upset, but my true self was relieved because it came into focus that, you know what, it's okay to fail. And it wasn't easy for me to fail. I was always trying to win the room. Um, so that's what it cost me, and I think you saw that. I mean, you were always on the sidelines watching me, whether I was practicing or competing, and then you joined jujitsu with me. That's been a fun inclusion. Um, so let me ask this, and I think we're coming at the end of our topic discussion here. Um, and I may have teased it just a minute ago. Do we feel like we ever fully um, silence the critic, right? I kind of said to your point, I don't think we do, right? But I want to challenge you. How loud was the critic before you learned that you couldn't silence it, but that you can create a relationship you have today where it doesn't drive every decision you made? So why don't you take a crack at this?
I feel like I was pretty young when I came to that conclusion. I was so used to having the critiques coming in from the outside rather than in here that you can go either one of two ways. Either you can have that barrage of critique and then think, well, if everyone thinks I'm shit, I must be shit, and live the rest of your life like I'm not gonna even try, you know. Or you can say, that everyone thinks I'm shit, and I know I'm not. So I'm just gonna show them what I can do, and it might not be the best, but it's better than the shit they think I am. So I feel like for me, it never got super loud. I feel like I became friends with it pretty quick, where I started learning like, okay, it can either help me and keep me protected, or it's gonna get me in trouble, and I have to know which is which.
So that was fighting back not a thing for you? Like you weren't trying to fight it, you were just trying to what? Coexist with it?
Become friends with it.
So what were some of the strategies you employed in order to befriend it? Like, hey, let's get along here versus being at odds.
I don't know. I guess I always liked reading, and reading always put me in a space that helped me to escape things. But um, I get yeah, if you have good friends that you can talk to, that always helps. But being in that situation and being a kid, I can't tell you what exactly it was. I just know that it's almost like a survival instinct. I think you come to learn how to become friends with it, or else it's gonna take you over.
Yeah. it's
That's the
it's kind of,
alternative.
yeah, but you said something really interesting there. Not a lot of people want to become friends with their critic.
Mm-hmm.
They either want to be, follow along, so keep the peace, or they go completely opposite, rage war on it, and then they're in turmoil internally, right? Because they're not at peace. They're struggling with their identity. Is this who I am? And then it becomes this. I'm trying to rid myself of my ego or my voice or this or that, and it's like you can't kill it. Like it's not gonna die. You can stifle it. You can silence it for a minute, but it's gonna pop right back up and tell you, I'm still here.
So maybe the benefit, like we go back to what we were saying earlier about there may be benefits in some of the things we suffered as kids, but if I suffered a lot of pressure and critique about who I was and how I was performing, that I think maybe that taught me at a pretty young age, because I remember being pretty young when I came to the conclusion that like I can't please everyone. I can't impress everyone, especially the people that matter most to me. So I'm going to stop worrying what people think about me, and either they like me or they don't like me. And that's not for me to decide.
Was that a struggle, like when you had to turn on that switch and say, "Hey, guess what? I'm gonna go with whatever consequences that is about the fact that someone's not gonna like me." Was that a hard sell?
No, not for me. It wasn't. I don't know. For me, it was all, I just said, this isn't working, and it's not making me happy trying to impress people, because I try to fit in and they don't like me. So I'm going to stop trying. And I felt like once I stopped trying to do that, I was happier.
That's powerful. Because my critic was one of trying to appease. I struggled with that. I didn't want to. I don't like leaving on bad terms. I really get bothered when people misunderstand me because I feel misunderstood most of the time. It's just because of the way I think. I don't think in these terms of this box or that box. I think like, hey, when I interact with you, I'm only judging you based on our interaction. Like I'm not even judging you. I'm just getting a vibe. Like if the vibe's right, I can talk to you, right? If the vibe changes, I'm like, I don't want to be in this loop of, oh, are we growing apart? Are we not friends anymore? I'm like, no, no, seriously, that's not how my brain works. My brain works, I'll see you next time. See you next time. That's it. Because I know what happens in life, at least in my personality, is life works in a way where you're busy, I'm busy, we're doing our thing, and sometimes our things are going to add up as stress, and I might need to call you and complain. Or maybe what I'm experiencing might bleed onto you, and that's not intentional, but that happens because humans do that to each other. How often, like, do we take out an issue or a problem on someone who's completely unrelated to the trauma or the frustration we're feeling that day? Someone cuts you off in the street, and then you come home and you get mad at your significant other. Don't mean to, but apparently I'm not managing myself good right now. You know what I mean?
Well, you just described yourself. I don't know anyone that's worse with traffic than you. I almost sometimes, I'm not kidding. There are times where I'm like, I don't even want to be in the car with you. You're never going to see these other drivers again, so stop yelling at them. Who cares? You know?
I'm not. You know what? I get it, but at the same time, I really think that when people are in La La Land, it bugs me. I'm just like, it's a signal. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know if you're turning into the lane. I get it, right? Yeah, totally.
And that's where you and I are different. This is what I'm trying to get at, is that I stopped caring what other people think about me and the things I do. Oh, I'd cut you off. It was an accident. Sorry. It wasn't, I didn't, I'm not over here preoccupying myself with what other people are thinking of me. They could be yelling at me in their cars. Who cares? I don't worry. I don't fill myself with that stuff. I was told one time by a friend that I was that my skew on friendships was cynical.
You said cynical, like as in what? Define that for
And
us.
it
What?
could be, I'm going to get into it right now. It could be that maybe I am being cynical, but I do truly believe this. I believe that friends are here for a reason or a season. Either, you meet someone and you know whether or not they're going to be someone that's going to be in your life for a while, or if it's going to be, we're going to have fun, we're going to have our good times, and then we're going to go our separate ways, and it's going to be the beautiful short time that it was. And I do believe that. And so I try to enjoy people, knowing that it may not last forever.
I get it. I get it. And you know what? There's just, I think that's one thing that we have to frame a little bit here, right? Is those people that come in your life for a season, that's not a bad thing.
Exactly.
Okay, because seasons come and
Yep.
go, meaning that they can come back on another season. It's not like one season and they're out. And then also the things that you learn from people. Like there's a reason why someone will present this individual in your life. And sometimes we're the ones being presented in their life so that they can learn a lesson. Good, bad, or ugly, that's for the individual to figure out, right? That's not for the ones in the mix. Like if I'm in a situation with someone and all of a sudden they're like, I really learned something from you, then I'm like, okay, then perhaps that was the purpose, perhaps that was the point, right? Where it goes from here is anyone's guess, right? Because I think it's like attraction is you're gravitating to this group or this person or this hobby or whatever it is, okay? It's a pull and you're going to go towards it. And I say if anything pulls away from you in life, just wish it well. It's okay. Like, hey, it's time for you to do your journey. Great. I love you. I support you. Don't think anything about distance as a way to say that we're not friends or we're not connected. Unless there was a specific reason to fall out, then that's something we can address. And that's the other thing. It's like the inner critic keeps us from making peace when there's been war. If there's been a conflict, boy, the inner critic on both parties are so strong that they're like, well, I'm just going to keep playing the way I play. And then they just stay in their camps.
Right.
Um, I want to wrap this episode up with, a plan of action. So here's what I'm thinking. And love to hear what your take on this because I think you've had some really, you know, interesting ways of looking at it, where you didn't have those kind of like those concerns that I have, where I'm worried about the other people, even to the point where their concern is bigger than my peace. Okay, um, but if you're saying to someone out there who has an inner critic, right? What's the best advice you'd give to them, right? To maybe make friends with it, like you said. What are some tips that you can give to those out there?
I mean, it's going to sound cheesy, but I'm a big believer in meditation and, just getting to know who you are. And the more that you can start um, caring more about how things affect you rather than how they affect others. I know that sounds very selfish. Um, then that's the closer that you'll get to not having it run you, that inner voice, to making more of a friend with it, like knowing when to discern, like, okay, well, now it's just trying to protect me, but now it's trying to get me in trouble. For me, that's how it is. I feel like you have to get to a point where you stop caring about your image so much.
It can be tough. I think some people's, their entry even into that space is something they've been, wrestling with since day one.
Mm-hmm.
How does one prepare their mind for that space so that they can execute in those steps? And it sounds really easy, and I
It's
know it sounds
not.
cheesy, but yeah, I agree. It's definitely not. What I would say to those out there who are like me, who are trying to appease the room, right? Realize that no amount of good, no amount of effort, no amount of well intentions, right, will see you getting the notoriety that you want. Okay, and I think at the end of the day, you have to understand, right, that you are in a situation that you have to keep yourself happy. Okay, because you can have the best intentions of being everyone's friend, trying to get along, And at the end of the day, someone's going to find something they don't like about you. Your hair, the way you walk, the way you carry yourself. So if you don't come to peace with that, and I know this personally, okay, you're going to be in this cycle of, well, I just need them to like me, just approve of me. Or I can be better, and it's not a question of you being better, okay? You be you, and by being your real self, you'll attract the ones who will love that version of you. If you're constantly changing for everyone else, then unfortunately you're going to be stuck in a cycle where you're going to make everyone else in the room happy, but you're going to get miserable year after year. And I don't want you to wait 40 something years where it takes something super, super tragic to you, like it did for me, to make me wake up and say, I don't care anymore. Not about what people think, but about failing. Because I was so worried about being perfect that I couldn't get started today. So that's Outframed Podcast. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on today's episode, tackling the week's theme, the inner critic. I hope you had a great time. I hope that you're able to come out again with us, maybe with the Rat Pack, or we can do another Eminem show like this. And for all of you out there watching our journey and being part of it, I hope this resonates with you. You know, we're not trying to do anything special outside of just hearing conversations, things that we're all struggling with, we're going through. And if you have the story and you're willing to share it, reach out to us. There's no judgment here. Everyone's position and where they are in the race of life is different. And if anything, I can offer you this, a place to share your stories. So from all of us at Outframe Podcast, I hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Okay. Well, that was fun, huh? It was a deep topic for today. I didn't know how it was honestly gonna go. I think maybe that was part of the critic in my head. It's like, hey, how's this in-person podcast gonna go?
I mean, I enjoyed it, and maybe everything that I said isn't going to resonate with everyone. Like I said, I'm a little more unconventional. I
Yeah.
maybe had to learn how to survive pretty young, and so I'm not going to. I had to like figure out the whole trauma healing thing at a young age. So,
Yeah, it was tricky. I was like, okay, so and when we were talking before we recorded the episode, I'm like, wow, we're gonna have different takes on
yeah,
this.
which is not to say that I'm healed at all. I'm just saying.
I don't think anyone's really healed. I just think it's like at the end of the day, it's like, okay, who do I assimilate a little bit more? And maybe we'll get that one person who watched it and go, none of this, none of this. And I'm like, well, then you're unique.
I'll be honest
because
with you. One of the most common things I've heard people say to me, people that I've been friends with for years and years, they're like, one of my very first impressions of you is that you were cold. And it makes a lot of sense. It tracks. It's sort of a mechanism if you really listen to what I was saying.
Yeah, maybe it was like you were saying you were modeling some of that defense, as the someone who you grew up with, like your dad. I found your approach interesting. I was like watching back our interview, and I thought to myself, she made friends with her critic. That threw me. I was like, how do you make friends with your critic? Here I'm over there trying to be like, well, it's not the boss of me now, but you made me think about my critic as not someone I can get rid of, but someone that I need to make peace with. And I think that's a big part that's missing here, is making peace with yourself and learning to love yourself and learning to know that your value it's not on the shoulders of a few people.
You're going to have pressure from everything else in your life. You're going to have pressure from your kids to do well as a parent. You're going to have pressure from your spouse to treat them well. You're going to have pressure from your parents to keep visiting and calling. You're going to have pressure from everywhere, right? You're going to have, pressure to get dinner on the table every night. Something as simple as that. Why put more pressure on yourself?
I think we do it instinctively. We just think we can keep handling and then we get buried under the weight. And I'll tell you right now, I
That's a conversation for a separate day. I promise you. That's I may have become friends with the inner critic, but that doesn't mean that I don't overload myself and boil over every now and then. Everyone does.
Yeah, I think it's human nature, we're and those who say, well, I've beaten the ego, or I've conquered the
Bullshit.
critic. Yeah, I don't buy it either. I
Sorry.
really don't. Well, everyone, I hope you had a blast watching Michelle and I do the our first M&M. Let us know in the comments. Feedback is always welcome. The Rat Pack will be back next week on a next week's theme. But if you like Michelle and you like to have her come back, show some love. So until next time on Outframed Podcast, take care.